Well, lawyers for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange are suing the U.S. CIA and its former director, Mike Pompeo, for recording their conversations with Assange and copying data from their devices. Two journalists have also joined the case, and Redacted correspondent Dan Cohen spoke with one of the lead lawyers recently, Richard Roth, and he's here to tell us about it.
Yeah, Natalie. So the extradition of Julian Assange from the UK to the United States is inching closer by the day, appears to be imminent after a prolonged legal battle, which has, of course, been brutal for Julian Assange himself as he languishes inside Belmarsh prison. Now, at the same time, there's a parallel case where, as you said, well, there are lawyers and journalists who visited Assange when he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, and they were spied upon by apparently the CIA through a contractor named David Morales, who is a former Spanish soldier who ran a security firm called UC Global. So Richard Roth is the lawyer representing this case against the CIA and former CIA director Mike Pompeo. So I spoke to him at length, so let's watch that interview. So, Richard, you are the lead attorney representing two attorneys and two journalists who were spied upon while visiting Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And you have sued Mike Pompeo and the Central Intelligence Agency. Can you just, first of all, explain your case?
Sure. So as has been reported, and everyone is somewhat familiar with, Julian Assange has been in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Well, he was there from I think 2012 to 2019, about 2018, 6 years. After that, he was literally physically taken out, and now has been sitting in maximum security prison in London. And while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, which he sought asylum and received it, he literally lived there for 6 years. So 6 years. So he had numerous people come visit him over the 6 years. You can imagine he had doctors, he had lawyers, he had journalists, he had friends, he had family members. All of them came in to just their relationships with him. He couldn't go anywhere, so they came to him. We learned that during the term in 2017, we learned that, in fact, and this is all came from a Spanish proceeding, which I'll get to, that in fact, anyone who came into the embassy, when they went in, they had to first hand the security there, their iPhones, their iPads, their laptops, cameras, everything, and then they walked into the embassy. We learned that in around 2017, the CIA, crazy as it sounds, had a company called UC Global spy on Assange from 17 until he was out of the embassy. And what they did was they took those phones, laptops, iPads, etc., and imaged them, and they went back to the CIA. So the first problem is these people that went in, two journalists and two Americans, went into the embassy with the right to privacy, not thinking anyone was going to take their electronic equipment and image it. Unbeknownst to them, everything was imaged. The second problem is that when they went in to speak to Assange, in that room, he had one main conference room. It was bugged. There were microphones and cameras in that room, unbeknownst to him. And the argument that we're making is that the federal government cannot actually, it's an invasion on your privacy. They can't take anything, look at anything without a search warrant. And by that, you need to have probable cause, go to a judge, the judge will issue a search warrant, and then they have a right to look at whatever they want. And what the CIA did in this instance was they didn't do anything. They just said, we want to see everything that anyone that comes in and out of Assange. So these four American citizens who have constitutional rights have sued the CIA and Pompeo because they have very strong reason to believe that, in fact, their rights were violated. Pompeo was sued in particular because when he first became the head of the CIA, he announced that Julian Assange was what he called a non-state hostile intelligence service, whatever the heck that means. And so he believed he had the unfettered right to do whatever you wanted with Assange. Assange wasn't a U.S. citizen, so do what you want with a non-U.S. citizen. But as far as U.S. citizens go, you can't just image their information and as well as take notes and have video and audio of the meetings. And that's essentially the basis of the argument.
So, with the CIA spying on Assange and everyone visiting him, including his lawyers who presumably were devising his defense strategy, what does that mean for the US government's case against Assange? That seems completely absurd.
Yeah, think about it. Think about it. Not only does the CIA have all of the information that was imaged from the lawyers when they went in, and there's doctors for that matter, but they actually have the video and audio footage of Julian Assange sitting with his lawyer preparing a defense by a case brought by the CIA. So it is very problematic if and when he comes to the U.S., and we believe he'll be extradited very soon. That'll be a motion that's going to be made before the federal court judge in Virginia. How can Assange properly defend this case when the government not only make allegations against him, but knows when his defense starts, they overheard conversations. So it'll become very messy in Virginia. But just to think that the government has that information, it's even worse than that. Because think about it. If Deborah Erbick and Barton Kunstler, both of whom are lawyers, walked into the embassy and handed their cell phone and their laptop was imaged, then the CIA has confidential communication between not only them and Assange, but them and their other clients. So if Miss Erbick or Miss Kunstler have a file with John Smith, the CIA has that file. And it's just totally inappropriate for the CIA to actually just image everything without getting any kind of authorization by a judge. So on many levels, it's very troublesome. It's also troublesome on the doctor-patient privilege. Doctors go in to see Julian Assange, and in fact, the CIA has his medical information, which no one should have. But the most troubling thing, to your point, is that the government is suing Assange, and Assange, in preparing his defense, is being listened to by the same entity, the government that's suing him. And that is very problematic. And what's going to happen is that will make its way to motion practice in the Virginia courts.
Yeah, I mean, what would it say about a Virginia court if they actually pursue this? I mean, it seems like kind of, getting into kangaroo court territory if they were actually to use that. I mean, is there a precedent for a court allowing that?
So there is, and what the CIA, first they're going to deny it, although we think we have their hands in a cookie jar, which we can get to. But what they generally do is say, we will exclude all of that information and we will not use it at the trial. That doesn't really get Assange where he needs to be, because if the CIA doesn't use it but has it, if they're going to know his defense strategy, if they're going to know what witnesses he puts on, it's very problematic. So we'll see what happens. It is rare. It's happened before where a government agency will say, you know what, we have documents, we'll exclude them, but not on this level. I mean, what they've taken from Assange is essentially everything, from conversations to documents his lawyers have. So they really have, if you remember back, New England Patriots were in trouble when they took the playbook of, I think it was the Jets. They really have Assange's playbook, which is totally inappropriate and really just, it's beyond aggressive.
So, Richard, it seems like your case just got a lot stronger with the latest revelations from El País. We learned last week that Spanish police had only turned over to the court that is prosecuting David Morales, the Spanish security consultant who spied on Assange, that they had only turned over part of the files on his computer, on his electronics, his hard drive. And that included more than 250 gigabytes that had not been seen before, including folders marked CIA. So what does that mean for this case going forward?
So it's a very good point. To your point, when we first started this litigation, we believed that we had very concrete evidence that essentially linked the CIA to the security company UC Global, run by David Morales at the Ecuadorian embassy. We had it by way of affidavits from individuals who worked for UC Global, who essentially swore to the fact that they thought they were engaged in illegal conduct by providing information to the CIA. So we had a good basis to start this lawsuit. On top of that, recently, the El País, the Spanish newspaper, follows the Spanish proceeding every week, and they publish all the time on information they've learned. So, on top of what we thought was a very good brick and mortar, we've learned that UC Global had in its possession, and the documents are recently turned over. To your point, files that say CIA on them, files that essentially link the CIA to UC Global. Now, ask yourself, scratching your head, if the CIA had nothing to do with the UC Global's surveillance, then why would UC Global have CIA files within its coffers? So we now know that there's clearly a link between the CIA and UC Global. And what's happening on a weekly basis is through the discovery in the Spanish proceeding, we are learning a lot more about the CIA's nexus to this case. We've also learned from the memoir in Pompeo's book how he doesn't admit it, but the timeline makes it very questionable how the CIA was not involved in it. So we're getting a lot more, and every week El País is doing a document dive, is learning information, and is publishing it. So we believe that between the El País articles and the Spanish proceedings, it'll really it'll strengthen our case. That being on the evidence. That being said, we still are faced with the obstacle. The current status is the government made a motion to dismiss. And as we all know, it's very hard to sue the U.S. government. They have doctrines of immunity, all kinds of sovereign immunity. So if we can get over those hurdles, the hurdles of being able to sue Pompeo and the CIA, then the next step will be discovery. And we will be seeking all this information from the Spanish proceedings, from El País, and from the defendants themselves, UC Global, as well as the CIA. So there's a lot that we have to learn. What we have thus far is very strong evidence the CIA was involved. The legal obstacles, the next obstacle we have to overcome to defeat the motion.
It seems strange, kind of suspicious that the Spanish police only handed over part of Morales's electronics, the data on his electronics at first. And, according to El País's reporting, they have a couple of Assange experts that they quote as saying they highlight the appearance of deleted folders with information, among which several are marked with the word hotel, which is the name that Morales used to refer to the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he was taking refuge and spied on. And they say there's an abysmal loss of files and folders. Is that strange or even legal for police to withhold that information?
Yeah, it's certainly strange, and it may very well be illegal. Remember, this is Spanish law, so I'm not an authority on that. But it's certainly just, I have a problem. I mean, we all have a problem just thinking about it. If the police are, if documents are ordered to be turned over and they aren't, I could raise a president who's about to go to court on Tuesday in Florida about not turning over documents you're required to turn over. So it's the same issue. And in fact, the Spanish police may very well be in trouble for what they've done. My concern is not that. My concern is, now that we have the information, what is it? What can we look through it? Can we see it? Can we actually determine what the relationship between, like you said, the hotel, the CIA? There's a lot of information out there. And we believe that through Pompeo, the CIA did engage UC Global and did get information from Pompeo, which we were talking about earlier, both the imaging of information when you walked in the embassy and then the recording of information when you met with Mr. Assange.
And so if the case reaches discovery, I mean, you're representing two attorneys and two journalists who met with Assange in the embassy. But of course, as you said, there are many, many people, from family members, journalists, other attorneys, all kinds of people who met with him and were obviously spied on. What kind of information do you think you might see if you reach the discovery phase?
Yeah, so there are a lot of other people. Yeah, there's dozens and dozens of other people. What we have to do is we have to fit them within a time period, 2017 until he left. The ones earlier, we don't believe there was any kind of agreement with the CIA, as well as the fact that they have to be U.S. citizens, because if somebody from Spain goes to visit them, there's not the constitutional protection. So those are the two limitations. But we think through discovery, we're going to get that information. We believe we're going to get Deborah Erbeck's image computer. We're going to get Margaret Kunstler's image computer. We may even get Assange's criminal lawyer out in D.C., his information. So we think there's a lot to get. We are very confident that everyone that went in there was both imaged and recorded, and it's only a matter of time. Again, the legal obstacles they're surmountable because it's hard to sue the CIA. But if we get past that moment, the first thing we do is go to the Spanish courts and say, "Let us see it too." So we think that there's a lot of information that really will embarrass the CIA. Because let's think of the irony here. Julian Assange is essentially going to be extradited, and he's going to be tried for essentially wrongfully locating and disclosing information, which is exactly what the CIA is doing. They are wrongfully taking information from Assange. So there's a real irony here in what's going on. We hope that we hope for a lot of things. One is that we get that information, and two is that in the Assange case, this issue is front and center because it's just really inappropriate for a governmental agency to take all your information and then try you with it.
And so all of this comes as the UK recently rejected Assange's appeal against extradition to the United States. So as Assange is closer and closer to being sent to what few expect to be a fair trial in Virginia, the case against him is becoming more and more absurd. And UK Home Secretary Priti Patel has 2 months to decide on this extradition. So what would it mean for the UK to allow him to be extradited, given what we know at this point?
So it's very interesting because the politics are unfortunately into play. During the Trump era, there was a real an aggressive pull to bring him back to the U.S. I don't know if Biden knows what to do with him because on a lot of levels. Level number one is that if they don't prove that he was actually hacking computers, the NSA computers, Snowden's computer, Manning's computer, and that he was just an investigative reporter, then what do they have against him? And number two, which is even more problematic, is that it really puts a kibosh on the First Amendment. What it does is it sends a signal to any investigative reporter. If I have information which I got illegally, am I not to report it? Think about it. Think of how many times the New York Times, Fox News, CNN gets information. Think about Donald Trump. They got his tax returns. The New York Times did several page articles. They got it allegedly illegally. Should they not publish it? And what it does is it causes a chasm between the First Amendment and the investigative reporters. And I don't think when he comes here, I think there's going to be groundswell of support to say, wait a minute. If Mr. Assange literally got information and published it, where's the crime? And that's what's going to be happening in Virginia. It'll be it'll be interesting. It hasn't really peaked yet because he's not here. But you're right. To your point, within the next couple months, he will probably be, certainly by the fall, he'll be extradited to the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sends. There's a chilling, I think, that the prosecution of Assange creates, and seems obviously intentional that anyone who goes on WikiLeaks or comes across any information or is given information that the powers that be may not like is going to think twice. And it seems like the prosecution of Assange, that's really the goal here.
Well, it's scary. It's scary. It's scary. Think back to Woodward and Bernstein with the Watergate era. Think about how they were given information, which 50 years ago, I believe, they were given information which they published in the Washington Post. The information probably should not have been provided to them, but were they to not publish it? Think about the chilling effect it'll have. We wouldn't have Watergate if they got in trouble for publishing information, which they got in their own right. And think about how many times every day you pick up the paper, whether it was the Trump administration, the Biden administration, when the press gets information, they are not only is it better to actually publish it, but they have an obligation. If there's something that happened historically, they have an obligation to tell the world. That's the whole conflict between the government and the press. And for the government to just put a kibosh on what the press can report, it is a very chilling effect. And it's scary. And it's very scary what would happen to this country if, in fact, the government can determine what the press reports.
We've seen very little political will to defend Assange from I mean, there's been a little bit. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has said something. I haven't heard much from any of the squad lately. But overall, there's almost no defense in kind of political circles of Assange. What do you attribute that to?
So I think the reason why there hasn't been a lot of a groundswell of support or either side for Assange is because it's not here, it's not present. He's been in London. He's been in London for years, both in the embassy and now in prison. So I don't think that groundswell has happened yet. But there's an irony here. There's an irony that Donald Trump is about to be arraigned for violation of the Espionage Act. And the Republicans, I think it was Rand Paul said recently, the Espionage Act should be abolished. So there's an irony here that the Republicans, who were really the ones that were going after Assange, are now in their own little pickle with this act. And so let's see what happens. I do believe that once it comes to Virginia, there's going to be a tremendous amount of attention paid to Assange. There was an article written by, I think, 5 of the leading world newspapers 2 months ago, including the New York Times, El País, and other papers, saying he should not be tried. So I think the reason why it hasn't really come to light yet, or hasn't really come to the surface, is because it really hasn't begun to happen. But once he gets extradited, which we think is soon, and once there's a federal court judge in Virginia who's overseeing his matter, that's when the press, I think, is going to people are going to really take notice of this case.
Thank you very much, Richard. I appreciate your time and your work.
Thank you for having me.
So I think we really can't overstate the significance of this case, because it shows that the CIA was spying on Assange and lawyers that he was meeting with and others in order to build their case, for the U.S. government to build their case, which will soon be prosecuted here in the United States, not far away from where I am. So, I mean, if this case advances against Assange, as it apparently will, I think it'll be a really dark moment for the U.S. justice system and expose a level of fraud and sort of a kangaroo court that how the U.S., how the Biden administration and the Trump administration before that is doing away with facades of democracy in order to punish Assange. So the deal is not done, of course. We're going to see what happens after this apparent extradition, but I think it's going to be a real battle for democratic norms, any semblance of democratic norms to be maintained here in the U.S.
Right. I mean, these laws were like, they're hanging on by a thread, but they were written for a reason. I was recently reading up on the sexual assault cases in Sweden and how those were totally bungled. And the women and Assange, both of their rights were totally disrespected in pursuit of this agenda. So we've seen governments sort of bend over backwards to reinterpret their laws, and laws that are just holding on by a thread. So this is something that, we're supposed to be able to avoid in a democratic process, in a judicial society. But it's fascinating to watch. And so we appreciate you keeping us abreast on this one.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.